Hello, welcome. It's Sunday, so we're talking World War One once again. Oh, we're never gonna get through this war, are we, boys? Jeez,
See,
I'm about to get shell shock. No kidding. No, everybody. This week we are talking about August and September 1916. Go ahead, take it away, guys.
okay, first we've got in the 1st of August, the Italian battleship, the Leonardo da Vinci, sinks in harbour. And by all accounts, this is a magazine failure detonation. And what's interesting back in those days is the whole doctrine of the armoured battleships, and that is that their internals aren't really protected from any internal explosions. And like the turret the turret in the outer armor is designed to deflect or prevent anything from getting into the magazine. However, if you do have a detonation inside the magazine, it is absolutely devastating, which is exactly what we see with the Hood in World War II. The turret, which was designed to take the shells that the Germans were firing at, did its job, no problems. But plunging fire went straight through the deck and hit the magazine at the weak spot, which caused a catastrophic detonation. This, on
Well,
the flip side,
Later
well,
on,
real quick, Farty, didn't they still have the wooden decks?
I'm not sure about the Leonardo da Vinci. The Hood did have steel decks. However, we have another interesting sort of thing that where everybody learnt from this was with the detonation of the number 2 turret on the USS Iowa back in 1989, and that, from by all accounts, they reckon it was a powder ramming issue which caused the detonation, and 43 men basically got liquefied in that explosion. But it did exactly what we learnt from battleships like the Leonardo da Vinci and the Hood, where a lot of mechanisms were put in place so that if indeed there was a detonation in the turret, the detonation wouldn't go down in through the magazine and detonate powder charges and shell stores and stuff like that. So you have the Leonardo da Vinci have an accident and just get almost vaporized. You have the Hood that got penetrated through a part that was less armored and it got vaporized. But then you have the Iowa had a detonation that, in all accounts, should have vaporized it, but we'd learnt so much that with blast shielding and blast plates and like airlock doors and stuff like that, that the explosion was only contained to the turret. And the turret did its job properly. It didn't deform and all this. And I think from memory, they basically, for want of a better term, hosed everybody out, cleaned the place up, and the gun was back in operation in very quick time.
Yeah, that was pretty devastating. Now, what I like about this picture is, if you notice, this was a modern for the day. This is a pretty modern battleship.
Mm.
You know, take a look at the turrets on this thing. Right, this was Italy's attempt to produce a real warship that was worthy of the name warship. So this was a devastating blow. When this thing sank, it was a devastating blow to the Italian Navy, Italian prestige. I mean, we tend to laugh at these things nowadays, but this was actually an important ship.
Mm.
the equivalent today would be like a magazine detonation, just like that, in the Gerald R. Ford.
Yep. Yeah, and I mentioned this in a previous episode that, like, your battleships were your prowess, they were your projection of power, and they were your status symbol in the world. If you had a very strong navy with very powerful battleships, then you were the thing. And to lose one is an immense blow. It's not just a blow to your combat strength. It's a blow to your pride. Like, oh, geez, that blew up so easily. Oh, crikey, our ships aren't like great.
Well, here's another question. So, all right, I know it was sank. How fast did it sink, and how many hands were lost?
I did look that up. keep talking. I'll get you that figure.
That's a good question. I don't. To be honest, I don't know the answer to that. We'll let Farty sit up there and tell us about that. But it was not attacked, right? As far as anybody knows. Initially, of course, when a ship blows up in a harbor, did it get hit by a mine? Did it get torpedoed? Okay. Exactly how did this happen? Now, the Bulgarians did have, not the Bulgarians, I'm sorry, the Austro-Hungarians, rather, they did have access to the Mediterranean. They did have submarines in the Med that they would send out periodically to sink ships. Now, I don't think they had anything to do with this explosion.
Well, let's talk about Austria-Hungary real quick. At this point in the war, they're not completely diminished, but they're not even doing as well as the Confederacy did in '63 at this point, right? I know '63 was like the peak of the Confederacy, but this is Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1916. You would think they would have more force projection than the Confederacy did. You know what I mean?
Well,
but they don't really.
They don't. You're right, and I would from that perspective. I mean, it's a difference. They're more of a landlocked nation in that regard. And as far as how good the Confederacy was doing, I would beg to differ with how effective, how well they were.
Well, they say '63 was the high water mark because it's as far as they were able to invade the Union, and then they were pushed back. That's why they call it the high water mark.
But at the same time, they were almost split in two. It just had the final piece hadn't happened yet. Okay. So.
I've got that figure.
Okay.
The Leonardo da Vinci was the last of 3 Conte di Cava class dreadnoughts built for the Regia Marina, or the Italian Navy, in the 1910s. Completed just before World War I, it saw no action and sunk by a magazine explosion in 1916 with a loss of 248 officers and enlisted men. Now, it was refloated, and they were going to repair her, but they ended up hulking her and scrapping her for parts in 1923.
Really? They actually pulled her up from the sea, huh?
Well, within a harbor, I can see how they might want to do it. But a magazine explosion like that to repair that ship, and actually bring it back, to be honest, it's kind of useless, really.
Well, your whole integrity is completely shot at that point, right? So you don't want to re-kill the whole thing, right?
Well, that's a funny thing about like battleships and stuff like that. With all the devastation and stuff that happened in Pearl Harbor, almost all of those battleships that did sink in Pearl Harbor were refloated and put back into service. Now, it is telling that it took them until 1923 to finally realise that actually this is a bit too nasty on the Leonardo da Vinci, and then they did end up scrapping it.
Well, the thing is, when you have a magazine explosion, you've basically broken the back of the battleship. To bring her back into service, you have to add you'd have to, even if you couldn't weld, well, especially because you can't weld back then, you'd have to add so much steel to her to basically you have to add so many doubler plates that you'd add thousands of tons of steel to the ship, and it would never be as strong as it once was.
Yeah, the process at that point, to be honest, was they would break the ship in half, and they would take the part that was still effective, and they would just rebuild the entire front section or the entire rear section, depending upon which part that was less damaged. All right, in order to actually repair it.
Well, last question before we move on to the August 3rd. August 3rd. When you refloat her and you fix her, do you rechristen the ship or do you keep the same name?
Ooh, now, not sure with the Italians, but renaming a ship in most, like, not even just navies, but even in civilian forms of shipping, that is insane bad luck.
Exactly. You rename a ship, you change the luck, and it's considered the worst point at which it's considered bad luck to rename a ship is before she's been launched. So if you're halfway through construction, don't change the name. For the love of God, don't do that. So
I can actually give you an example of that. We got an oiler from Britain, and we named it the Westralia. And we ended up fucking scrapping that thing only within about 10 years because it just had nothing but problems. If it wasn't breaking down, it had an engine room fire, which killed, I think, about 13 sailors. That ship was just so bad luck, the fucking Navy refused to use it.
Another ship that was renamed was the Endurance that carried Ernest Shackleton's trans-Antarctic expedition. She sailed out in open sea. She would just constantly flounder. And she ended up sinking because she was crushed by the ice.
HMAS Melbourne, one of our 2 aircraft carriers post-World War II, that same thing there. She wasn't breaking down all the time. She was originally something else in the Royal Navy, but yeah, we called it the HMAS Melbourne. And it actually ended up having 3 collisions. It collided with a Sydney ferry. It collided with the HMAS Vengeance and snapped it in half and killed a whole bunch of people. And then there was the Frankie Evans, a US destroyer. And part of the Vengeance and the Frankie Evans problem was we told them, both ships, don't cut too close in front of us because we can't stop them, we can't turn and all this kind of stuff. And they did, and we fucking ran over them.
You know, that's kind of a good point, because I was going to bring up, wait a minute, what about the CSS Virginia? But no, she was scuttled. So, yeah, okay.
Mad Dodge, what you're saying a few minutes ago about how hard it would be to bring back ships and all that kind of thing, and you made the comparison to the Pearl Harbor, that was very much we could do it and we had to do it because that was our entire Pacific fleet at the time. But then also during that war over in the Atlantic, you saw other cases of that kind of thing happening, like the USS Murphy. I can't remember the name of it, but like the Queen Mary, one of the big ocean liners, Murphy crossed a little bit too close in front of it, and Queen Mary just took off her bow. They ended up putting another bow back on it because, well, we need ships.
Yeah, they would do. It was basically they would just try to do whatever they could and rebuild it. And yeah, I as far as rechristening goes, though, normally what they would do is just, if they could, in some cases, what they did is they took, if there was 2 ships and both of them were badly damaged, one was damaged in the bow and the other one in the stern, is they would take what was useful of both of them and match them together, and then they would just choose, okay, which ship's name are we going to keep? All right, they wouldn't change necessarily the name. They would just say, okay, which ship had the most extensive work? And then we choose the other name. So. All right. You have the Ouija on Lake Tanganyika. All right, occupied by the Belgian forces. The Belgians are actually on the move. And then you have Roger Casement executed. Now you want to talk about that, Farty?
Yeah, Roger Casement. By all accounts, he was actually quite a decent fella up until the point he committed high treason. He started off with the British diplomatic service in the colonies and stuff, and he advocated for better treatment of people in Peru. He wrote a report called the Congo Report, which was a bit of a scathing sort of assessment on the British the Empire's treatment of the colonies, mainly in Africa. And he was a massive advocate for people's human rights and all this, and that's the part where he seemed like a bit of a good fellow. He also was advocating for independence in Ireland, and in doing so, he was in league with America. He was very popular in America. If you look him up, you'll see like tons of articles about him, where he was trying to advocate for Irish independence and trying to get America on the Irish side as opposed to the British side. Then we get to the Easter Uprising, and this is where he was found to be not only the leader of the Easter Uprising, but he was also doing things like working in league with the Germans and buying weapons and stuff off them. Prior to this, he'd actually been knighted, so in all realism, back in those days, he would have been Sir Roger Casemate. But when you get done for treason, they repeal your knighthood, or if you do anything nasty or anything like Jimmy Savile, you basically get your knighthood stripped from you. And they arrested him. They charged him for high treason, which more was sleeping with the enemy as opposed to talking shit about the royal family, which can actually happen. And it's interesting because he had a lot of he wrote a series of journals which were called the Black Journals, and he apparently at some point pretty much mentioned the fact that he was a homosexual. Now, most people try to sort of call shenanigans on that element of his journals, but apparently in 2002, the British did a handwriting analysis and said, yes, no, the handwriting is from the same person. Now, where the controversy about his admission to homosexuality is that it's not past the British to do this just to fucking defame people. They did this to Alan Turing after World War II. He had great umbrage with what happened with the computer that he built, Colossus, and the conditions that he was put in after that. And just to shut him up, the British said, you can't even talk about this. It's a part of the National Secrets Act. So be quiet or else. And he didn't be quiet, and they or elsed him, defamed him like that. So there's a bit of controversy over that part there, whether he actually was or wasn't. Either way, it probably is very likely that he wasn't, and the British were just doing it to be snide.
Which one was he? The one on the right or the one on the left?
He's the one with the beard on the right.
Oh, okay.
That's why I was circling him before. This guy. The guy next to him is one of the guys that he was working with when he was in Africa and the Belgian Congo.
See, now one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, and where I say that this bloke was, in all regards, a fairly decent person, you can't really blame him for wanting to stand up for Ireland, being Irish himself. It's effectively like Dodge, Cuba attacks America. You're not going to stand there and fucking cop it, are you? You're gonna fight for your own country. So him being Irish, he was obviously going to side more with the Irish as opposed to the Empire. And just in doing so, you couldn't really fault him. If anyone would listen, he was obviously going to seek out help from them. And since America and the Germans were the ones that said, "Yeah, sure, we'll help you," you can't really fault him for siding with the enemy in that kind of an essence.
So, not only he was executed on August 3rd, but it was him and 12 or 24 others, right? They executed all the leaders of the Easter Rising.
Yeah, something like that. But Roger Casemate was like the head ringleader.
Then why did they keep fighting after? Never mind. Different war. Okay.
Yeah, that's another kettle of fish, that.
You don't want to get into the potato wars?
Potatoes. Fiddly-dee, fiddly-da.
Okay. You end up another battle in the Sinai. This is another attempt, right, really by the Ottoman Turks to disrupt operations into the Suez Canal. And overall, its real effect was just to cause the British to increase their forces there, all right, to ensure that nothing else was going to happen. And then later on, you're going to see it's going to lead to the British going on the offensive, all right, to take the Sinai, all right. So, is it an important battle? Not extraordinarily, really. But if you want to take a look at it, it's right here. Right, You see where the Turks initially came in? They hit this. Now, these are the Anzac troops that had just been resettled, for lack of a better term, all right, from Gallipoli.
Mhm.
They were taken off Gallipoli, and there's a here. We're going to have you talk to the Turks some more.
But here we've got a bit more of an advantage here because we don't have the extremely hilly types sort of kind of thing. But we've also, in that area, got the Australian Light Horse Brigade. So we've now got shock troops.
And you also, at this point, have the Air Corps for spotting.
Mhm.
Believe it or not, the British Air Corps did have a number of planes. Now, if you don't mind, Falcon, go ahead and talk about flying in the desert in this area.
Well, crud. A lot of people have this belief that flying in the desert is pretty easy. Well, it kind of is when you're in a modern turbofan aircraft and you can fly on instruments. Back in those days, when you had a relatively rickety rotary engine, VFR, visual flight rules only aircraft, and you have to deal with things like sandstorms. Oh, and you have a carburetor or a simple mixing chamber with no air filter whatsoever. You go from annoying to, oh, there's a sandstorm on the horizon, I better land now or I am going to die. And even then, sandstorms pop up really quick, so maybe you get to fly today, you'll know in like half an hour kind of thing.
What about air density?
Even more so, it all looks good and everybody starts flying, and then the sandstorm hits.
Well, that and what Farty brought up, air density, that did tend to be a bit of an issue. The air density tended to be pretty low, so there's a term out there called density altitude. So you could be at an airport that is, let's say it's Denver, Colorado, 6,000 foot elevation, but you have very high air pressure that day, so your density altitude might be 5,200. Huh. That's really nice. It's as if you're flying at 5,200 feet, but you're actually up at 6. In the desert, they tend to have very, very low density altitudes, and thermals are a giant problem out there.
Because your air density also decreases the more the temperature rises.
Exactly. So in the middle of the night, you have very, very, very high air pressure, barometric pressure, but during the day it drops to nothing.
So what you see in this battle on this map, all right, is you see where the initial push for the Arabs got to this point, and then you see the British forces, all right, basically running along this edge here, all right, pushing it back. Now, one of the things that they did do, the British did, is this rail line. You'll notice they start to push it. They start to build the logistics so that they can they can really build up their forces then to take on the offensive, to really take the Sinai, and then obviously go into Jerusalem in the Jerusalem campaign. Now, this is all part of the British strategy, and the good thing about this is it comes at a very propitious time because the battles everywhere else are going horribly, especially the Battle of the Somme, which isn't going well.
Okay, but that unit way up to the right of the screen, the red unit, which I'm guessing it's British, yeah.
Just here?
No. Up. That. They're in the air, aren't they?
No.
How are they not flanked?
Think of this being moved to here. These were a series of lines as the British are getting, or as the Turks are getting backed up, and then this is the final British line and the final Turkish line.
Why are they still not being flanked? You see how long the Turkish line extends?
What does it say here?
Well, this is a massive shock to the Turks because they've just kicked their ass over in like fucking the Dardanelles, but they they had the advantage at that point. They had all the strong points. They had all the elevated positions. They had their entrenched artillery positions. We were trying to fight uphill. Now, the tables have turned here. They're now fighting across fucking flat desert terrain. They're trying to do a mobile attack kind of thing with effectively conscripts. And they don't have the training and the resources and all this kind of stuff like what would the Australians and the rest of the Commonwealth do. And this is basically our bread and butter. We're like, fucking you beauty. We can bring our artillery up. We can use them in conjunction with our troops. We've got the Australian light horse brigade, so we can rush areas and attack them and basically wipe shit out. And like, we're now fighting in our own terrain, even though it's a foreign country, and there is a rule of war. You don't fight in somebody else's territory. We're both fighting in somebody else's territory here, and the Turks just can't do it.
Yeah, but you're using a horse brigade, right? How are they not being mowed down?
Because the Turks don't have the same types of defensive positions. They're now down in trenches and shit like that, where they used to be up in elevated positions where we couldn't actually use the horses. But we can rush them so fast and so hard that a lot of their conscripts basically almost up and run. They look at this and go, oh, yeah, we were up against the Australians again. Yeah, we beat them before. Holy shit, what's this?
They're not charging machine guns. They're not sending horses into machine gun fire. If that's what you're thinking. Okay. The horses are used for mobility to get them into a position that they then attack from. Just like in the Civil War, most of the cavalry actions that people talk about, they think about, Hollywood has them riding through and on the horse shooting, right? Right, while people, blow bugles and so forth. But that's not how it was. Most of the times what the cavalry did is it would ride into an area and then dismount. Okay, and then open fire, and then when the fleeing began, that's when they get back into the saddle and they would ride them down and shoot them when they were already running back. They wouldn't go in there with the horses against a stable line, against a line of troops.
Yeah, we'd be bringing up.
Well, they did actually. Like you say no. Wait a minute. You say they won't do that. They actually did that a few times.
Yes. Then we'll get onto that when we talk about Beersheba. But MC's right. Yep. They would get up to a point. They would dismount. They'll hammer the crap out of them with artillery and now airborne, aerial spotters. And if they could do it in Europe, they'd be using like aerial bombers and stuff like that. But then they'd rush the position once they'd been weakened. But in Beersheba, what you had there was the Turks. The Turks were entrenched in a township, so they were using buildings and stuff as defensive positions and whatnot. And it was a thing that, the faster we get in, the faster we actually set foot inside the place, the quicker that they'll shit themselves and leave, which is pretty much what happened. But they didn't have entrenched positions or anything like that. The houses that you're talking, or buildings you're talking about, are like mud huts and waddies and stuff like that, where a 303 round can do some devastating damage to the walls and stuff like that. And if you have massed fire hitting a window, chances are that window is now 9 feet wide, and anyone that was in that 9 feet are now dead.
So when you send a horse brigade, then it's not like a flanking maneuver like in earlier wars where you're trying to wrap up the line or you're trying to break through. It's really just ride up as fast as you can, and now you're infantry.
In some cases, it's an effective and armored punch that you'd see with the Blitzkrieg, but just don't have the armor.
Okay, go ahead, guys. Because World War I was the last time where these type of tactics with horses really were effective, and they're still not that effective after this battle, right? I mean, I'm telling you, I remember 2 or 3 battles where these horse brigades got wiped out.
Yeah, Beersheba was the last time it was actually effective. Was it? I think it was the Poles.
Well, the Poles, because they were throwing everything they could to stop the Germans in World War II, at the beginning of World War II. But the French and the British had given up that kind of cavalry charge early on, because they did attempt them early on in the Western campaign. right, against the Germans, and quickly realized, yeah, this isn't going to work.
Now, what is interesting, though, is post-World War One and even leading up to World War Two, when tanks are now a thing, and the British wanted to now basically call tanks as cavalry, armoured cavalry, and they wanted the cavalry units to take over the tank regiments and whatnot, particularly horse guards. And this is just completely stepped in tradition. Nothing more than just tradition. It's like, no, we're horse guards. We're not tanks. What's this newfangled, silly, bloody thing? No. Horses have worked for us before. No, we're keeping our horses. It's part of the reason why you still do have horse guards in the British military, and they're effectively ceremonial, for want of a better term, nowadays. But that's basically the tradition, and they did get a lot of pushback against tanks and whatnot between the wars.
Okay, let's go on now. You have the advance of the main body of the British forces in East Africa, which we've talked about. That is in the Sudan file. Another battle, all right, for the Italians in the Italian campaign. And let's go back to and remind people where what you're talking about. This is what they're talking about. Now, the battle that they're specifically attempting an offensive in is on this area here, right? And you can see for 2 years they fought over this, and this is how much the territory has actually changed. All right, this part of the battle actually at least gets them to this area here. All right, so it is an effective. It is effective as far as the feeling from the Italians. They were able to move this, but the whole idea at this point is they're trying to move on this city here. This is the Mediterranean base of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. This is where Trieste is where they have the sub pens and everything, and the subs are roaming through, sinking shipping throughout the Mediterranean. All right, now is it a lot? No, because they just don't have very many submarines. But they are a nuisance, and they do present a problem.
Well, is this why, like, the Italians were expelling their blood and treasure and not really gaining anything? So I see why the other members of the Allies were like, yeah, screw you, Italy, you don't get to keep your land you took. But then again, you can kind of see why the fascists rose after the treaty, right? I mean, they got stiffed. How many men are they losing?
They're losing droves. People are dying in the tens of thousands. They're dying as rapidly as they are on the Western Front when they're going over the top.
Mm-hmm.
For Italy, to be honest, this was such a disaster. Italy would have been better off, all right, rebuilding its forces from a maritime power, just stabilizing, keeping themselves on the defensive in here, and letting the Austro-Hungarians utilize this while they created a large amphibious force, and then brought in the attack from that perspective.
So, MC, you're basically saying it was a slaughter.
Oh yeah, they're being slaughtered. These are just horrible pens. This is what Hemingway was writing about. This is where he served, was in this arena.
Okay, yeah, no, I understand that, and I'm just trying to reiterate that, because when we end up talking about the treaty, Italy walks out of there fuming.
Well, yeah, because they got. So does Japan. When it really comes down to it, so does Japan. But both of them end up very upset about the situation.
And so you can see why they joined the Germans in World War II, right? I mean, they got stiffed by the other fucking alliances they were already in, which is pretty much the bulk of the Allies in World War II, right?
To an extent, you could make that claim. All right. I mean, you could overstate it as well. I mean, what were their gains? Their gains were minimal when it really comes down to it. The real problem with the Treaty of Versailles, from the perspective of the of the Italians is the Italians. They have, like, right through here. To be honest, they've got some historical claims to this area. This could have been ceded to them very easily, and probably would have been accepted. Also, if they could have gotten Trieste, right, which they don't, they probably would have accepted it. Those would have been, to me, those would have been minor concessions given to the Italians. But to be honest, it didn't make any difference. The rise of the fascists had more to do with the situation, not the Treaty of Versailles per se, but the situation that Italy found itself after the war. I mean, you got to remember that a lot of their youth, a lot of Europe's youth, they're dying in droves. Yep.
As I mentioned with the PALS battalions, like in some cases, it's entire towns worth of men die.
You got to also remember that a lot of well-known scientific and literary and musical figures, you know, a lot of the celebrities of the day died. They literally died in this war. People tend to forget that.
And Muhammad Ali wouldn't go fight. Anyway, go ahead, move on. Unless you guys want to keep talking about this battle, you can move on to the next day if you want.
No, we'll go on. Portuguese government decides to extend military cooperation to Europe. All right, now this is going to lead them into the war. Gorlitz is taken by Italian forces. All right, we were just talking about that. Stanislaus was taken by.
Yeah, wait a minute. I want to talk about Portugal. Okay. So the Portuguese, the Spanish, weren't they having internal strife during this time, or was that the lead up to World War II?
You're thinking more of the lead up to World War II.
Okay, because I was going to say, why don't the Portuguese take advantage here?
And do what?
Take the freaking rest of the peninsula?
What advantage would they have by taking the rest of the peninsula?
Isn't there lots of Spanish gold?
Well, if they did take the rest of the peninsula, that also means taking Gibraltar, and that means fucking with the British. So the British don't really like to lose Gibraltar.
I'm just saying Portugal should have took on the Spanish at this point and not been a tiny little footnote in history after World War I. But hey, that's just me.
Well, I mean, there's always chances that maybe they can rise again, and then they'll once again become the powerhouse of the Europeans, right?
I doubt that, but you can go ahead and continue.
All right. Like I said, Gorizia is taken by the Italian forces. Stanislaus is again taken by the Russian forces. All right, this is part of the Brusilov offensive. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The Mawapa in Africa is occupied by British. Italian troops land in Sri Lanka and join the Allied effort. This is.
Hang on. I was waiting for you to try and pronounce that. It's Mpwapwa.
Okay. I've been corrected in how to pronounce it. I came close. You got to give me credit for that. Come on now.
I've been waiting for that for 2 weeks now.
You've been waiting for that for 2 weeks just to harass me on how to pronounce that correctly?
Yeah.
Believe me, there's a lot more stuff that I will mispronounce here, so you can correct me all day long. Now, the Sri Lanka, the Italian troops landing at Sri Lanka, what's happening there is they're trying to. This is Albania, okay. This is the remnants of the Serbian forces, okay, and they're being overrun. And what's happening in this area is Bulgaria is really the ones putting the pressure on. Bulgaria, some of the Austro-Hungarian forces, and so forth. But the Serbs are still wanting to fight. They're trying to take back their country. But basically they've been kicked out. The the real problem is the Greeks, because the Greeks wanted to stay out of the war. The problem is now is their land is in the way. And you are beginning to see incursions back and forth across their territory by both sides, to where the Greeks will attempt to try and defend themselves, but really there's not much that they can do, because both sides are itching to go through that land to get to one another. I mean, it's quite interesting what you end up with here, and this is the areas that we're talking about, right? And you can see this is Turkey down here. I mean, Greece down here, right? But this is where the what's the remnants of the Serbians have gone down into and have fled into this area down here. Right? Okay. Mush and Bitlis in Armenia is reoccupied by the Turks.
Ooh, do we get to talk about the Armenian genocide now? I've been waiting for this episode.
You genocidal madman.
No. Like I said, fucking Anna Kasparian said it didn't exist, and remember, she's right because she's better than us. Remember?
How dare you?
Dude, that's like a 3-year-old meme.
Well, it's one of those ones that'll never end, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But if you want to talk about the Armenian genocide, go ahead. It hasn't happened yet because you haven't. Turks yet.
Yeah, no, exactly. It hasn't happened yet. We'll wait till we get there because, then we're going to go into current events and the deniers and everything else. That's going to have to be a whole episode.
Well, are there really any deniers? Let's be honest. I mean,
the Young Turks. Yeah, the Young Turks. Fucking, what, the Turkish people themselves, right? Don't they still deny it?
MC, there are people that believe the Earth is flat. Of course, they're going to be deniers.
Well, okay, but how many? Does anybody give the flat earthers any kind of any kind of consideration? Let's be honest.
Other flat earthers.
What was that?
Other flat earthers.
Oh yeah, there's flat earthers too, but does anybody give them any credibility? Honestly.
Not normal people, no.
Okay. then you understand my point, right? All right, let's get back to this. The battle ends, and then the Brusilov offensive ends. Now let's talk about this man here, Brusilov. All right, he's one of the few Russian generals, all right, that actually wins a battle. All right,
Well, you know why he won, right? That glorious mustache.
Bigger question, because Russia. How many men did he lose versus how many they killed? Okay,
now he is the one that's pushing the campaign against the Austro-Hungarians. Okay, and he succeeded to the point where the Germans, all right, had to rush in reinforcements. They had to move 30 divisions from their northern area down into Austro-Hungary to back up their allies.
Okay, well, there's a pause here. Okay, this dude's wearing so many medals, it's like a freaking chainmail tunic. Like, what the fuck?
Well, there's a lot of those medals are kind of more political based and all this kind of stuff. Like, yeah, there are some, like 5 years long service, 10 years long service, and things like that. There are orders of the Russian Empire and some medals like that he just has to be breathing to obtain. But then there are quite a few battle honors in amongst that.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't just a general because of his pedigree. Let's put it that way. Okay, he was actually one of the generals that knew what the hell he was doing. However, one of the problem, of course, that the Russians had, and it continues even to this case, is yeah, he was making progress, all right, but his whole offensive, all right, was designed to not just reduce pressure, all right, on the northern half, right. It was also designed to give the northern generals a chance to go back on the offensive against the Germans. Now they moved 30 divisions, all right, from around the other fighting areas to prop up the Austro-Hungarians. 30 divisions is nothing to sneeze at. And yet, what did the northern generals do? Well, he was becoming successful. His name was becoming known, and their jealousy basically squandered this entire offensive is basically squandered as a result, because they don't go on the offensive. All right, they refuse to actually take advantage of the situation. All right, to really press the Germans and push them back.
Is that just political intrigue within the military?
It's sloppiness. It's lack of logistics, but for the most part, yeah, it's jealousy of the fact that they don't like the fact that he's succeeding, and now he's got the favor. So we won't increase his standing by mounting some attacks, which would have definitely helped that offensive to become even a greater victory. They could have knocked Austria-Hungary completely out of the war if they would have stood up there and mounted an offensive, even if it was a spoiling offensive, but a serious offensive against the Germans, and prevented them from moving those divisions from the northern portions, right, to prop up the Austro-Hungarians.
Another larger portion of this is that, like, a lot of his underlings were just flat out incompetent. Like, you can deliver the best, well constructed orders that you want. If the bloke you're giving it to is just a fucking useless prick, well, yeah.
All right, so you end up with that. You have the Battle of Florina, all right, which is in the Macedonian. This is right along the border of the Greeks. All right, the Romanian government concludes an agreement with the Allies for all intents and purposes. All right, and then you have a military convention signed at Bucharest between the Entente powers and Romania. All right, so basically, Romania is entering the war.
Oh yeah, we are all so scared of the mighty, mighty Romanian Empire. I mean, did it really matter that they were entering the war at this point?
Well, they're winning in the game.
It takes pressure. You got to remember, I mean, this does take pressure off of certain allies. It would have been better if they had joined the war early on. Maybe Serbia wouldn't have fallen. It would have definitely, if they had joined the war, maybe the Bulgarians don't join the war to help prosecute the war against the Serbs.
Oh shit, I forgot. Don't they have whole battalions of vampires? Like, oh
do.
Shit, yeah.
You see them battling over Transylvania, all right?
Yeah.
All right, the HMS Falmouth and Nottingham are sunk. The Battle of Florina ends. All right. Kislev in East Africa is taken by the British forces. The British are on the move in Africa. But what's interesting here is these forces are kind of small to begin with. But what's worse is, even though the British are taking land and succeeding, it's not being publicized, really. These are not being considered great victories, all right, on the British Isles, because they really don't give a shit about Africa.
Another thing there too is that the Germans in the colonies, in the German colonies in Africa, aren't really putting up much of a fight. By most accounts, most of the Germans thought that the African colonies were basically a holiday. They were undersupplied, they were underarmed, They had zero resources and any help or replenishment, and they basically thought right from the beginning that, well, we're not really going to fight because we'll just get our asses kicked, and if we do shoot at the British, they're just going to roll over the top of us. So,
and they weren't exactly wrong with that attitude either.
So they didn't generally put up a fight. It's kind of like, the Challenger 1 main battle tank, killed 1,000 Iraqi tanks in the first Iraqi war. But yeah, when you look at it, the Iraqi tankers weren't really all that well trained and stuff like that because Saddam was worried that they were going to overthrow him. So you can't really brag about that one.
So, let's talk about the HMS Nottingham, and is that Falmouth?
Falmouth.
Okay, they were sunk by a German U-boat, right? The British Navy has to be starting to feel these losses, right?
Yeah, it's just like any other of the countries that lost a battleship. I mean, like the British were like the pride of the seas and all this kind of stuff. They were the most powerful, and this shouldn't happen. Same thing like with the Hood. It was, how did the Hood get taken out so easily and so quickly? It's these battleships are supposed to, like the dreadnought, post-dreadnought battleships of World War One, were supposed to be the biggest and baddest thing on the planet, and then you have this tiny little U-boat sneak up and hit it with a torpedo, and wow, that is a big blow to your national pride and all this kind of stuff.
Well, remember this as far as perspective from the battleship. If you're a watchout on the battleship, you're looking for something the size of a Pringles can, like 600 or 800 yards out, and it may not be moving at all. Sometimes these U-boats would just go to periscope death and then just wait there, not moving at all. So there's no weight from this Pringles can.
And as fast as these battleships were, like, they were considered fast battleships, and they did move in a considerable click. They still had the turning circle and the responsive. They still had the turning circle of the island of Manhattan, and they still had the responsiveness of an old person in a Zimmer frame. Once you did see the torpedo, it was sort of like, right, everyone run away from that part of the ship.
Well, no, and I would like to take this moment here. We're almost an hour through the show here. Hey, everybody, I don't know how long any of us are going to be on YouTube after December 10th. So, if you could do me a favor and head over to bitshoot.com/Mad Dodge Productions. If they kick me off, that will be my primary site that we'll be doing streams from. And yes, they will be having live streams soon. I hope. Cross your fingers, guys.
Yeah, I'm kind of waiting for that myself. So.
And go ahead. I had to throw my little commercial in the middle of the show. Go ahead.
And the boomers say, but they're a private company.
Yeah. Okay. The next thing that's of note is the Germans attempt to break the blockade with subs, and they actually have the German commercial submarine Deutschland, right, has returned to Germany after coming to the United States as basically a merchant ship. The United States is a neutral party, and the Germans are thinking, okay, well, if we can get a big enough U-boat presence, we can actually float stuff over to America, get supplies, and float them back. And so this could have become a supply line. Now, the reality is, though, yeah, you can do stuff like this. It can be successful, but how much? Let's be honest. The amount of shipping you need to really change things was going to have to be far more than just one or two U-boats that are fairly, they're not carrying the kind of cargo that you can carry on top, and the speed with which you can move this cargo with obviously these ships is very, very limited.
Well, even with the more advanced U-boats of the Second World War, you need a fleet of hundreds to make any difference whatsoever. And during the First World War, when you were on the surface, you did 10, maybe 15 knots. When you were submerged, you're looking at 2 or 3, which is like a slow walk.
Even worse than that, there were certain ocean currents below there that are faster than that, and you may be just basically, sitting still because you're underwater.
It's called running on the spot.
Exactly.
Or position keeping, pretty much. Yeah, like the freighter U-boat that they had. You might think, okay, well, that was huge, but you're still talking about you needed at least 20 of these things to do what a normal surface ship could do. So to get the same amount of cargoes, and when you talk about convoys, they had 20 to 30 surface ships with all of the cargo on board. You'd need exponentially larger fleets of U-boats to even so much as match what the convoys were doing.
And also, don't forget, you have to man these U-boats, and it takes like about a dozen men to man a U-boat, but it takes almost that. It takes just a hair more than that to man a surface ship. So the manpower you'll need to man these boats is just so much higher because you have a bunch of small boats instead of one big ship.
And also, when you're talking about the types of land warfare that's going on too, you really can't afford to have merchant sailors just pottering around the ocean just trying to get a measly little handful of supplies.
Well, and exactly, and what's happened is the Kriegsmarine has basically taken all the merchant mariners and basically said, "Now, congratulations, you're now a sailor in the Kriegsmarine."
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The Battle of Rayat, which is in Armenia, begins. That's between the Russians and which I think we already talked about over here, between the Russians and the Ottoman Turks. All right, where's Riyadh at? I don't remember exactly where it's at, but this is the area that we're basically fighting in right here. This is going back and forth. Okay, but what's interesting is notice they're not making any kind of forays up into here into Tbilisi or Soviet Georgia at all. What will become Soviet Georgia? All right, you have the Anglo-French Conference on finances held at Calais. All right. What do you know anything about this, Farty?
Well, this is just another one of those. The Anglos, meaning like Britain and all the Empire and all that kind of stuff. It's just another one of those. Okay, what are we going to be doing now? Who's going to be sending what where? Do we need to commit more French forces to the Empire's operations? Another thing with the French thing, their colonies as well. Do the British need to send more troops to the French colonies to help bolster them? Obviously, not really, because the like we mentioned before, the Germans aren't really doing much on the dark continent. But it is just another one of those.
I think a lot of this is also loans because they were trying to pay off a lot of the some like the Italians and the Greeks, and they were floating a lot of loans at this point, right?
Yeah. And we made mention of the first one of these that this is something that's basically going to be almost a monthly or quarterly sort of meeting where they'll get together and like, right, this is how the war is going, this is what we need to do, so and so's just joined, what do we need to do for them, or what are they offering us? It's just basically an annual or a monthly general meeting, effectively.
Okay, the Russian forces crossed the Danube, all right, to assist the Romanian forces. And then you notice it's 2 days later is when the Romanian government orders a mobilization and declares war. Now, they're at war with the Bulgarians, but they're not at war with the Austro-Hungarians. They're getting ready to go to war with the Austro-Hungarians. All right, now what are we talking about here? This is what we're talking about, all right? This is the Danube right here, this river. You can see it all the way up through here. Basically, the Russians, all right, have made a pact with the Romanians to attack the Bulgarians. And they push them out of the Danube in these areas. And you'll see them, they begin fighting in these areas right here. All right, now these are obviously the intent of the Third Army by the Bulgarians. They actually, this is where they want to go. This is their goals. They never actually get there. All right, the Russians basically forestall this, and what you're going to start to see is the Austro-Hungarian Empire start having battles up here in the Transylvania area against the Austro-Hungarians. Now, the Austro-Hungarian Empire has already defeated Serbia. They basically pushed all the Serbian forces out with the help, of course, of the Bulgarians. Serbia has basically been occupied. Montenegro has been occupied. Most of Albania has been occupied.
You know, I made fun of the Romanian army, but couldn't they move and flank the flank of the German army here? Or are they already down? So this is empty territory they could just swoop into, right?
Well, they do attempt with the Russians, all right, to go on the offensive through this area. They go basically on an offensive all along their border.
Yeah, I would if I was them, like, and playing my Conflict of Nations game, right? I would push into Serbia instead of Bulgaria.
They've
And
already done that.
Okay.
Well, no, the Romanians haven't, but the Bulgarians have already taken the Serbia doesn't no longer exist. This has all basically been taken over by the Bulgarians and the Austro-Hungarians. Think of this whole area now as they're Romania like this, and they're surrounded by
so they have to focus on Bulgaria. I got you. Okay, never mind. I was confused.
All right. Morogo, all right, is taken by British forces. Once again, the Romanian government mobilized to declare war on Austria-Hungary. The Romanians cross the Austro-Hungarian frontier and invade Transylvania. Germany declares a war on Romania. Italy declares war on Germany. And that's kind of an interesting thing because the Germans technically weren't at war with the Italians at this point. It isn't until this point that they become, attacking one another. And then Sir Stanley Maude succeeds Lieutenant General Percy Lake as the commander-in-chief of the Mesopotamia.
Falcon, are you on your cell phone? Is that why you keep getting kicked?
I am. My phone is also about to die, so it immediately went right into maximum power saving mode. So it kicked off all the, basically kicked everything off. So I had to turn that back off. For other reasons, well, I'm always on my phone, but it's acting up more than usual. I still have to go and do my pre-drive, basically time how long it takes me to get to where I'm going to have my interview tomorrow. So that, I've been up since 4 o'clock this morning, and I really need to sleep. You guys have a good night. I'm going to drive and then collapse.
See you, mate.
Yeah, take it easy, man.
Not a problem.
All right. Have a good war.
All right. Now, you got to remember that the British, all right, had a major loss here at Kut. Okay, and they've been basically pushed really all the way back to Nasiriyah. Right, so they have a change in leadership to try and rechange their fortunes because they want to go back and they want to once again make a push for Baghdad. Now, what has happened, all right, is the Russians. Remember, the Russians were successful in going through some of these areas here, especially up into this area. All right, and now the Russians are going to start getting pushed back. All right, in Transylvania, Bratislava is occupied by the Romanian forces. East Africa, another area in East Africa, is taken by the British forces. Field Marshal von Hindenburg succeeds General von Falkenchief as Chief of Staff of the German Field Armies. All right, General von Ludendorff as the Chief Quartermaster in General. This is important in regards to the Eastern Front because the Russians, Hindenburg had his great moment at Tannenberg, right? The big big German victories. And within the German high command, they've been posturing as to who should be the one in charge. Okay, because of course both sides are claiming, when I say both sides, you have the Eastern Front and you have the Western Front from the German perspective. Both sides have claims to, we need armaments, we need men. As you build new divisions, you need to send them somewhere. Does this division go to the west, or does this division go to the east? All right, Hindenburg and Ludendorff, all right, are now in the position because to prosecute the Eastern campaign first.
And one thing about Hindenburg, while we're starting to mention him too, is that even though Germany does end up losing the war, spoiler alert, Hindenburg is seen as basically Germany's grandfather after the war. It's what Hindenburg says, pretty much Hindenburg gets, and whatever he says goes. And with the rise of the Nazis and all this kind of stuff, everybody was sort of like,
You lost it.
was actually quite afraid of him. He was really waiting for Hindenburg to finally die off before he was actually going to put his plans into action, because he knew that Hindenburg wasn't going to have a bar of it.
Well, he was seen as the like you said, grandfather hero, all right, of the German people.
Well, and okay, so the Western Front has stabilized. Until further notice, I would just try and keep that stable, right? And then you head and try and defeat Russia, which does end up happening. And now you have, well, I mean, they're still fighting in Africa and stuff. It's not necessarily a one-front war, but close enough at that point, right?
Pretty much. So,
because doesn't Russia capitulate in this year, right?
No. They go. They're not going to capitulate. We'll get to that. There is going to be the upheavals generally begin at this time, but they don't capitulate until 1917. So they're still a year away.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, go ahead and continue, because this is a little bit long for our Sunday show, but we'll get through September. We told everybody we would, so continue on.
Okay, Turkey declares war on Romania. Romania severs diplomatic ties with Bulgaria. The Venusian...
Wait, real quick. Okay, when you cut your diplomatic ties, right? How fast does that fucking ambassador have to run? Right? He's out that bitch. Quick as shit.
In a lot of occasions, he'd be the first one to know. It'd be like, yeah, get out, because tomorrow you're going to be a dead man.
Well, yeah, but they're also, you got to remember that people don't attack diplomats generally. Even the United States, even after we were attacked in World War II, we didn't immediately incarcerate the Japanese diplomatic staff that was in Washington. Okay, you let the diplomats, you expel them, but you give them time to get on the boat or get on a plane or whatever to leave. You order them removed, and you give them a time frame, and normally it's a reasonable time frame to leave. And up to the point where they leave, they're still carrying diplomatic immunity. So it's not a huge, it's not as rushed as you think it is per se, right? I mean, they're not fearing. These guys aren't fearing for their lives. Let's put it that way. All right.
Well, yeah, I can just imagine. You're at war now. Oh shit. Right? Because now either they're gonna hang you as a spy or they're gonna just capture you, right?
Basically, yeah. I mean, that's what it comes down to. So, the next thing you have is you have a revolt. This is a small revolt, the Venetian revolt in Sri Lanka. All right, it doesn't really do much. And then finally, the battle for Verdun ends. All right, this is the battle as far as the French goes. The German carried the battle up to the September 19th, but this is where the French basically closed their counteroffensive operations. Bulgaria declares war on Romania. All right. Sibiu in Transylvania is taken by the Romanian forces. The Russians and the British government conclude the Sykes-Picot Agreement for the eventual partition of Asia Minor. And then you have the compulsory military service bill in New Zealand comes into operation.
What are they drafting in New Zealand? Koala bears?
Well, something along the lines of about 236,000 men ended up becoming conscripted, and this was a ballot conscription, so every man of fighting age had to sign up pretty much, and they were picking that. Basically, it went, okay, people who are born on this date to like this date of this month to this date of this month between the ages of 18 to 35, I think it was. Now you're going off to war now, pretty much.
What percentage of New Zealand and Australia? I know you guys hate to be lumped together like that. I apologize.
No.
What population of you guys actually ended up serving? Because that drained your population quite a bit, right?
Yeah, it was effectively probably about 60% of the male population that could fight. No, the big misnomer is the Anzacs. Historically, we do get lumped together because we are historically together pretty much. It's the Australian New Zealand Army Corps. And the reason why that conscription took so long to come into to New Zealand was basically everybody was being told like the war was going to be over by Christmas. You know, this is just going to be a walk in the park. We'll see you in Berlin in a couple of weeks. And then we had things like Verdun. We had things like the Somme. And that killed so much of the New Zealand army, and same case Australian, that they were forced into conscription. Right, well, we've got to now double down on this, regardless of how many people are killed. And it was a massive shock to the colonies, especially the Australians and New Zealanders, because we did think that this was going to be over in a walk in the park and all this kind of stuff. And it was a massive shock when all this happened. Same thing with the Dardanelles.
Well, no, because I was just thinking the other day I saw the population for Australia. I don't remember the exact number, but it wasn't astronomical. And now adjust that for 1916.
So we're talking about like particularly around like the Somme, Villers-Bretonneux, those kinds of areas, Verdun. We're talking about, in some cases, 100,000 men in one long ass battle. Well, these were several long battles. So when you're talking about like say the Somme campaign all up, you had a few 100,000 Australians and New Zealanders get killed in that alone. And then we got the Dardanelle campaign. There was tens and tens of thousands of casualties in that, and like we talk about actual dead, not wounded. And that coming from a country with such a tiny population, like especially New Zealand, that really did make a dent. And this isn't over yet, too. Remember?
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would like to be said, though, even though the fighting forces were smaller in number than the other people, you guys were known for being very good fighters.
Well, that's another thing there, too. Like when you have places like Beersheba and especially around like the Eastern Front later on in the war, where we get to use tanks, we get to use aircraft and artillery and combined arms assaults and stuff like that. And I was banging on about Monash a few episodes ago. We finally get an Australian officer that's commanding Australian troops that knows what we can and can't do and can utilise all the resources behind him. And we do effectively get used as the shock troops because we are so successful at it. It's what they were trying to do in the Dardanelles, but failed miserably because we just simply didn't have the correct support in combined arms. And it does get to parts at the end of the war where some towns had been swapped over so many times by the British, the French, the Germans, and then finally the Australians come in, and it's a sigh of relief. The Australians are here. It's going to be over soon. We're not going to go through this handing over our town. We're not going to be sort of, no, they're here. They've told us they're here to stay, and we believe them.
It's funny. I can just imagine a bunch of Aussies riding kangaroos into battle. I know that never happened, but can we make this happen?
But, well, it is a thing that, like, Anzac Cove in the Dardanelles, the Turks actually renamed it Anzac Cove, and that's what it's officially called, because the Turks respected us so much from even though we lost that battle, they still respected us, and the war graves there. Even though fucking Tip Tap Erdogan, whatever the fuck his idiot name is, a couple of years ago was talking shit because of the Christchurch shooting, saying that, like, if Australians go to the Anzac service on in the Dardanelles, that they might be going home like their relatives. That was a stupid fucking thing for him to say, but like. The war graves there, if someone goes and vandalises those war graves, the Turks are more pissed off than what the Australians are, and we are fucking furious when that happens. So you can imagine what the Turks are like. And there are places in France and all this kind of stuff. There's signs and placards and stuff like that. Town liberated by the Australian 9th Division, 6th Division, fucking whatever battalion during 1918, 1917. And it was a thing that whilst the veterans and the people who were alive at the time were there, that if you went to those towns and you said, oh, I'm an Australian, especially if you said, I'm an Australian soldier, you were fucking Elvis Presley pretty much.
No, I believe you, because I was watching a documentary the other night when I went to bed, and they were talking about World War II POWs. And this pilot had crashed down, right? And he got freed by not the French resistance. I think it was the Belgian resistance. He was on the ghost train. That's what they were talking about, the ghost train incident. If you don't know that story, when we get to World War II, that'll be great, because it's actually really interesting. But he went back years later, and they had actually took out a metal detector, found the parts of his wrecked plane, put him in a box from the tree in the forest he crashed in, and gave it to him. Now, these brought up memories that weren't good, obviously, but holy shit, did they fucking love this guy to go through that much effort.
Mm.
Yeah, that's the way, I mean, it was a different attitude by people then. It really was. People don't realize it. Now, what I wanted to say was the battle again in Transylvania. This is it right here. Now, here's where it began. Here's the success that they had. All right, up to the point where Falkenhayn is called back. All right, and he is then given the ninth corps, the ninth corps. All right, of the Germans. All right, and in charge of the combined German Austro-Hungarian forces in this area. All right, so all the way through September, all right, from August to September, what you see is this attack taking place.
Just real quick on just what Dodge said. Yeah, the mentality of the time, right, where like the whole gentlemanly war aspect came about was that the average soldier and the average officer didn't hate the enemy. It wasn't a case of like, we got to go kill them because they're all cunts and assholes. Like the hierarchy did try and establish that kind of an attitude with propaganda posters, with like German stormtroopers treading on nuns and stuff like that. But in the actual battle itself, like a lot of these blokes ended up meeting up with each other after the war had ended, and a lot of them, and the same thing happened in World War II. A lot of them became good friends afterwards. There was a battle which we've yet to. I think it was Cambrai, where it had the first mass use of tanks. They also had another type of tank called a whippet tank, and it was a small, fast, basically machine gun pillbox, pretty much. And this one tank was crew leaded by a major, and they'd pushed so far into the German lines, and they were causing so much havoc that by the time that the tank had actually finally been taken out, one or two of the crew had been killed, and the Germans basically came up on this tank, and they shot another crew member, and they were about to shoot this major when an officer come along, and a German officer, and went, "Wait, no, fucking, he's a prisoner. We got to take him." And this British major actually gave his Rolex watch to the German officer as a thank you for not summarily executing him on the spot. And then after the war, these two actually met up, and the German bloke gave this British bloke his watch back. So yeah, a lot of that did happen, and it wasn't because the people on the ground actually hated each other. They were just doing a job pretty much.
Okay, guys. Unfortunately, that was a phone call from my daughter. I have to leave for a little bit here. So, if you want to continue with the timeline, please do. All right, and I'll be back. Okay.
Okay. Where were we?
All right, I'm not sure which day we were on.
We were right here on September 2nd. Is where I basically gave off.
Okay, all right, I got you. All right. So, do you want to read off the 4th, Farty? I have a lot of background noise. My mother-in-law's here and stuff. So.
Oh, well, I think we missed the German raid by 14 airships, greatest number of attacks simultaneously on London and other parts of England. The British succeeded in shooting down 2 of those, I believe. Was it just one? The SLs?
And they've yet to create the anti-aircraft guns, right? So you don't have flak going off. So you pretty much get to bomb at will at this point in the war still?
That is correct, yeah. Their only counter pretty much at the time is fighter planes. And when you consider that the large majority of the Royal Air Corps, which was known at the time, is over in France at the moment, there isn't really much but training aircraft, and effectively what you could do with those is a 2-seat Tiger Moth. You have a guy with a machine gun in the back and somehow ad hoc to the aircraft, and that's of course if you've got enough time to go up and get them. And they didn't have radar or any early warning system, so basically as soon as these things drone overhead, which is the only time you're going to know about it, you even don't have the luxury of the German buzz bombs, which was the V1s, which the engine cut out. And
I get you're talking about the air fight, but okay, they only had training aircraft. They're drafting, mobilizing to send them all to Europe. Now, if somehow the Germans could have broke out and actually landed in, let's say, the north of England, right? Well away from London, but able to start to get a beachhead, Britain would have been in trouble. Am I wrong?
Quite possibly. If in like the worst case scenario that most of the British forces had been pretty much annihilated on the continent, and the Germans did have get into a position where they could land in England, there would be a mass scramble to get everything back from the colonies to try and defend the mainland. A lot of the resources could quite possibly have been lost in France. They probably would have, the French probably would have, like they did in World War II, asked for all the resources from Britain so as they could defend. And luckily, what happened in World War II was that the British went, actually, no, it's going to look like we're going to need them, so we're going to try and save as much as we can. And after Dunkirk, it literally was a thing. The British Expeditionary Force did lose all of their tanks, all of their heavy weapons, all of their machine guns, basically all their ammunition, all their fuel, and they did literally have to start from scratch, which was a very, very concerning thing for the British. And if it wasn't for like the Americans and the Lend-Lease Agreement and the convoys and all this kind of stuff, there would have been a very big possibility that Britain would have been invaded in World War II.
Yeah, no, and I don't know. I believe if there would have been a landing in 1916 on the mainland of Great Britain, I doubt the Americans would have intervened in the war.
Possibly not. Because once France had fallen, I keep saying that it was more the French than the British would have been the compelling force for America to get involved. And at this point in time, in like 1916, America is still in its isolationist policy, and it's a European thing. Let them fight it out for themselves. And if France did fall, it quite possibly would have been there wouldn't have been that catalyst with America to go, well, there's a reason for us to get involved. It literally would have been fuck the British. They can, they can sit on it and swivel.
Now, would the British have done what Winston Churchill said in World War II? Okay, even if we lose England, we have our colonies. We will regroup and we will come back with a vengeance. Did they have the stones for that in 1916?
If indeed there was an invasion, and if indeed it was vigorous enough to threaten London and possibly even take over the British Isles completely, you could have had Ireland getting, because, well, with the Easter Uprising and whatnot, the Germans were in league with the Irish Republican Army and all that, so they would have had some help there. Now, the British government would have been what's called a government in exile, and they possibly would have gone to one of the African colonies just because of a closer proximity. They wouldn't have probably come out to Australia or New Zealand.
I was actually thinking Canada would be the smartest.
You still got the entire the Atlantic. That you still have the same problems as what you do with the southern colonies of like proximity. It's very, very difficult to run a war from the other side of the world. You are right, though. Tactically, strategically, it would have probably been better to go to Canada and then possibly petition America from there, because Canada did have a lot more in the way of industry and resources than what Australia and New Zealand did at the time, and definitely way more than what Africa did. So, yeah, actually, that would have been a possibility. Now, if they'd attacked from the north, there's this pesky little problem that the Germans would have faced with the Scottish, and the Scottish typically have been very militant about keeping Scotland as Scotland, even though they are part of the Commonwealth and all this kind of stuff. They're fervently Scottish before they are English. And if the Germans came in, you would have seen a mass mobilisation of the Highlanders and the clans and all this kind of stuff as a guerrilla force, and the Germans would have basically been bashing their heads against the brick wall there, just with supply lines and trying to maintain a foothold and all this. I reckon the Scots would have basically clobbered anything that came their way.
Well, I mean, if they would have exiled over to Canada, though, my thinking is, okay, you are now hidden behind the veil of the United States, and now you can have direct negotiation. You got the Prime Minister step up and talk to the President, talk to the people of the U.S., and try and sway them to intervene. I think that would be a better way to do it than to go run to Africa, where you do still have a German presence there, and you're kind of throwing yourself into a weaker position, in my opinion. And I know we're doing a hypothetical, but we're kind of waiting on MC, so why not run a thought experiment here?
Well, for England to go into a government in exile, England itself, not the United Kingdom as a whole, would have had to have been attacked and fallen, meaning like Britain itself, like England and Wales, pretty much, because I reckon the Welsh would have been supporting any counter invasion.
Oh, how hard would it be to take Wales in 1916? Right?
Quite easy.
Do you really? I heard it was really rough terrain, and that's why Wales was independent for most of the time, even during the Middle Ages and on.
But they don't really have much in the way of major cities and whatnot. They've got small villages and enclaves for the most part of it. So if you could move a force fast enough, you'd be taking out these small enclaves quite easily. And the largest majority of the Welsh defence is England and Scotland and Northern Ireland, pretty much. Any parts of the Great Britain, the United Kingdom, that's united with the kingdom. And once again, there too, if you had taken England as a whole, then another thing the British government in exile would be doing is assisting the Scots as much as they possibly could, because if anybody was going to be counteracting and being a pretty decent force against any German invasion, it would be the Scots. Like the Germans would possibly be able to take over England itself, but as soon as they hit the Scottish border, then they've got to deal with the Scots, and on their home turf.
Oh, no, and I'm not saying there would be zero resistance from the English. Of course there would be. Back then, you guys still had guns, right? So it would have been a lot harder than an invasion nowadays. Sorry, an invasion of Great Britain nowadays could probably be fairly easy.
Well, the clans are allowed to keep armories. They still have it now, where you can go to like certain clan manor houses and stuff like that, and they've got a wall just lined with muskets. They would have had better weapons in World War One, but like those fuckers are armed, and if you can get close enough, it's not the guns you need to worry about; it's being beaten the bejesus out of, like quite literally, like halberds and claymores and stuff like that.
Okay, I'm back.
Yeah, it could have really got very fucking medieval for the Germans if they'd in fact done that.
So where did you get to?
The German ship in Praeus, that one even eludes me. Harbour seized by the Allies.
What date?
Heroes. Oh, it was September 2nd. We just did a thought experiment.
Yeah, no, I posed the question, MC, and let's get your input before we go back to the timeline. I posed the question: if the Germans were able to break through and land on British soil, all the British forces are pretty much over in Europe already. So it would be a fairly easy conquest. And then we went from there to like, okay, it probably would. To a government in exile. I say Canada. That way they could try and sway the American public. He said they would probably run to Africa.
I think that they probably would have initially have gone to. They probably would have initially gone to the Ireland, the Irish Isles initially.
Well, there you got the Irish Republican Army, which at this point in time are trying to be in league with the Germans and all this kind of stuff. So you're pretty much.
Well, they may have been in league with the Germans, but they were just put down by British forces. So there are British forces on Ireland.
It's still insanely hostile territory, though.
To an extent, and then from there, I think they probably would have ended up going to Canada. I don't think they would have gone to Africa. The amount of what would have happened at that point is the Canadians probably would have started putting in more forces, but I don't think that the British would have fallen as easily as you think they would have. All right, for one thing, you're assuming that the British Navy, all right, can't interdict the supply lines. All right, and material. You got to remember, landing an amphibious assault. Yeah, you can make inroads, but you got to keep those areas supplied. There was not going to be any way that the Germans could have supplied that front. How would they get supplies over? You got to keep pushing in material. You got to keep pushing in food. You got to keep pushing in everything going on. And at that point, let's be perfectly frank. At that point, if the Germans had taken over the British Isles, guess what stops? Food supplies from America. How long are you going to last in that kind of an environment? How long are you going to last for it?
Yeah, well, no, and I posed that the United States probably wouldn't intervene at that point. And we might not intervene at all if Great Britain fell.
No, we intervene because if Great Britain falls, then the British Navy has to be defeated. Where's the British Navy going? I mean, the British still have the largest navy, and most of it's in Scapa Flow. Is it just going to disappear? Is it going to walk up and go?
Oh no, they're gonna start attacking their own country, which is kind of weird, right?
Well, they're gonna interdict the German forces, and they're gonna hit them at the beaches, and the beach isn't gonna last long now, is it?
Well, I did say if the Germans broke through, that would say that they sank quite a number of British ships, and they have weakened the force in this area. You gotta remember, the British Navy is large, but is also spread out.
Not as spread out as you think it is. A good portion of it is concentrated at Scapa Flow, which is granted in the Northern Isles, but it's not like it can't sail very quickly down down south. So if an invasion would have happened, the British fleet would have sailed, period. All right, and it would have interdicted the invasion fleets.
Very good point. Let's get back to the timeline, though. But I thought that was an interesting thought experiment why you had to step away.
Okay. So did you talk about the German raids with the airships?
Yep.
Okay. Now, one of the things that says the German ships in the Prius harbor are seized by the Allies. Okay. Believe it or not, that is over here. All right near Athens. All right, it's right here. This is that harbor. The Germans were, even though Greece hasn't declared war on anybody, right? The Germans had a series of ships in here, and the Allies come in there and basically take them. So it shows you that the fighting for the Greeks is happening all around it. All right, they're not technically involved in the war, but they're everything. All the battles are taking place in their territory. All right, then you have the Battle of Guillemot, all right, and the Battle of Devil Woods, all right, which is part of the Battle of the Somme. This is the just basically the battles of attrition for the Somme, which people are
Isn't that the? Well, no, yeah, isn't that the meat grinder we were speaking of a couple weeks ago?
Yep.
Yeah, these are actually fairly individual parts of the long line. Like Devilwood and Pozieres Ridge are only like a small set of about 3 or 4 towns in the line, and they do try and push in some of these places to try and relieve other points further up the line, and they don't go as well as anyone really hoped. They're basically the attacks are basically countered immediately. We still see the use of fragmentation shells instead of high explosive shells against defences and barbed wire and stuff, and men running across churned up land and open terrain where they're being fired upon by defensive positions with machine guns and whatnot, and they're effectively pretty much non-effective at all. But it doesn't stop them from trying again.
The retreating German forces in East Africa is checked at the affair of the Kilwa, on the East African coast is occupied by British naval forces. Really, this is just the capitulation of the German forces, what little forces they have left in Africa. These are not really significant campaigns per se, although they do offer territory and they remove basically all the German territory. Orsova in Hungary is occupied. This is part of the Transylvania push. Is occupied by Romanian forces. Another battle of the Somme, a smaller battle continues. All right, the Dobnya or Silistra is taken by Germans and Bulgarian forces. Once again, if we talk about those forces here, that's in this area. Over here on the Danube, what they're talking about is right here. All right. The Romanians initially, with the help of the Russians, took this area that's now being taken back. The Greek premier resigns. The seventh battle of Isnio is Isano.
Sonzo.
I can't pronounce that to save my life. The Battle of Fleers Crochet, basically the where tanks are in action for the first time. They actually bring in tanks, and the aeroplane cooperation with the tank is instituted by the British Air Force.
Yeah, we covered this last week.
Yeah, no, and if you didn't watch last week's episode and you want to hear about tanks, that's pretty much what we covered the entire episode. So go check that out. But yeah, anything you want to say about this battle, MC or Farty?
No, it's just the tanks. All right, of the tanks that went into this action. All right, I think all but 2 are destroyed.
Basically, yeah. If they didn't break down, they got blown up.
But they're battling in mud for all intents and purposes. Go ahead.
However, enough of a grain was proven, so the combined arms theory has now been proven to the point that we're going to use this again.
Well, the troops. The one thing that's really obvious from the start is that the troops really like hiding behind tanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right, because the tanks, the machine guns, all right, don't go through the tanks. So this becomes a point where the idea of how they use the troops didn't work, but the troops themselves are like, no, we need these things. We're just not going to do it the way you tell us to. I mean, because they're not stupid. Okay, that's really what it comes down to.
And as a result of this, the higher ups turned around and said to their higher ups, okay, all right, we lost pretty much all the tanks that we sent in because we didn't have enough of them. Now, what we need to do is we need to take a couple of months off, keep the Germans at bay while we get hundreds of tanks, and we get the Air Force to really sort of train in this, the supporting of the ground troops and all this kind of stuff, and because this is what's happened with them. The artillery didn't do anything to the defensive positions. They didn't cut holes in the barbed wire like we thought we did. It's still going to take us months and months and months to get the millions and millions of shells of high explosive that we need to do what we wanted to do in the first place. But wait till we get all of that ready and bring the tanks up to the front line with the trains and whatnot, and we get the pilots and enough air ordnance for them, and we get all the artillery with all the proper shells that we need, and we really need to coordinate this properly, and I guarantee you, this will work. And by the Battle of Cambrai, that effectively did.
A new Greek ministry is instituted. Lindi on the East African Wash is occupied by British naval forces. The Greek 4th Army Corps at Kavakis surrenders voluntarily to the German forces. And the 7th Battle of Isanozo ends. Okay. The capital of the East Germans is occupied by Belgian forces. The Allies commence a blockade of Greek Macedonian coast from the mouth of the Struma Mouth River to Mesta. The Albanian government of East Pasha is set up in Sri Lanka. The battle and this battle for Flares Colette is in the Somme ends. The Turkish garrison at Taifa surrenders to the Arab forces. This is Hajaz. So this is, if I'm not mistaken, this is right now where Lawrence Arabia has made a point. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
I think he is actually part of this battle. All right. Yep. You end up with a British airship raid on the east coast of London. Now, one of the things that I think that they made a major mistake with the Germans is, okay, Scapa Flow, yeah, it's out in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, it can't do much. But if they had concentrated a mass attack by about 30 or 40 of these airships in a coordinated action, they could have really seriously damaged Scapa Flow. They could have done enough damage to where the if it was coordinated with the German high seas fleet, they actually could have this is something that actually could have been effective, I think.
They they could have done a lot to damage and possibly sink and destroy things like your corvettes, frigates, and destroyers and whatnot, being lightly armed and armoured and all this kind of thing. But with your main battleship dreadnought groups and your heavy cruisers and things like that, they did have enough armour to basically laugh off an attack like this, because at this point in time, your bombs are only probably about 100 kilos at the most, and if you want to attack a battleship of some sort, you do need some velocity to punch through the armor, and you do need a very large charge to actually do some damage. So you're talking
if they'd have come in
1,600 pounds.
if they'd have come in on a night attack and not dropped bombs but dropped mines.
That's true.
All right,
They could have done that.
They could have done a lot, and then combined it with actually an action. Now, it would have been difficult to combine it with an action with the British with the high seas fleet, because quite frankly, the British always knew when the high seas fleet sailed. But if they could have gotten away with it, it could have changed the dynamic entirely. They really didn't use the dirigibles the way they needed to. All right, and they could have been more effective. It would have been risky. Don't get me wrong. Okay, for the dirigibles to get there and then get back would have been difficult for them to do. But in a war where you're at a war of attrition where you're dying, you're gonna have to pull out all stops to begin with. But back to this, the airship raid on the English coast. All right, they finally started involving civilians. All right. The L-32 is destroyed by a biplane, and the L-33 is brought down by gunfire in Essex in the night action. The Krupp's work in Essen is bombed by French aeroplanes. The French are starting to bomb things.
Mm-hmm. This is also where we start to see the actual use of a dedicated bomber aircraft.
Okay. The leader in Greece basically withdraws from Athens. Another battle in the Somme. The Battle of Thepal Ridge takes place. Now, this is actually considered isn't that a victory by the British? They actually take that ridge.
Yeah, for the time being.
Right. And then the Battle of Sibiu ends with the Austrian forces. This is on the eastern side, back over here in the Transylvania area.
Just for a quick, on Thepal Ridge, this is where a lot of these smaller battles along the Somme, that's what they were trying to do pretty much. So, yeah, Pozieres and that other joint, that was mainly designed to, they're going to, the British are going to focus here, so the Germans need to move resources down there, and once they've done that, they go, aha, we're going actually 20 k's up north, or 20 k's down south. And that was the whole point of those kinds of smaller battles of the Somme. And in some cases it did work, in some cases it didn't. In most cases, in all cases, it just cost a lot of lives.
Yeah, I mean, the battle of attrition and the just waste of humanity, the way they were going about it was just horrible. The Battle of Sibiu ends, it's retaken by the Austrian forces, and what you end up with is a Greek government setting up a provisional government in Crete, as opposed to the government in Athens. Basically, you have a civil conflict brewing in Greece. Greece is very divided as to which side they should support, because both the quote-unquote allies and the Central Powers, both of them are violating Greek territory at will at this point. And that ends September. So,
all right. No, from the Greek perspective here, I don't know. Do you just split your government on purpose and?
Oh no.
One goes and talks to one side, the other talks to the other, and you figure out who has the best deal, or what?
No, it doesn't like that. It's basically a free for all. Who's in charge?
There are
So
actually
Greece
three
is
elements.
plunging into anarchy.
Yes. There were effectively three elements. There was one that wanted to go with the Entente. There was one that wanted to go with the Central Powers, and there was even another one that wanted to stay out of it completely.
And it's devolving into all these. The Greek forces are fighting amongst themselves. Actually, now it hasn't gotten into open conflict per se, but the Greek people are like, okay, who's in charge, when, where, what? It's just chaos in Greece.
The arguments are there. If we don't do anything about the Germans, then the Germans are going to probably just walk all over us. The other half are saying, well, the British are bunging on this. If you're not with us, you're against us, and they'll walk over the top of us. And there's another third party going, look, if we just stay out of it, then hopefully no one will attack us at all.
Yeah, but which is the general feeling was to try and stay out of it. The problem, of course, is both the Allies and the Central Powers are both violating Greek territory. They're both invading the territory constantly. The Greeks are in a no-win situation, and there is no winner there. I mean, that is what it is.
And like I said, their neutrality does come a long way with their. That's what happens when your army wears a dress.
So that's the end of September.
Yep, no, and that's the end of the stream. The Battle of the Somme is still gonna rage for months on end, right?
Another month or so, yeah. September, October. I think its official end is in November, isn't it?
I think so. It effectively culminates with the Battle of Cambrai, where they do start using the combined arms in a very, very effective fashion. And it's after that point the Germans do start to sort of dissolve in a fashion.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching. We'll try and do the red eye tomorrow. We'll see. My mother-in-law's here. All right. Good night. Good luck. Don't go to France, and we'll see you later.